Yes. Direction. Holding up the Lancet. This is giving us the direction we need. Music in your ears after yesterday's comment by Richard that science was fancy guesswork. Is that what he said?
Yeah, fancy guesswork. You know, we can also call it science fiction. But, you know, after all the work that we do, what we really need to think of is how are we going to measure and monitor all the goodness, all the good things that we're doing. And for this, we want to present the Food Systems Countdown Initiative. And I want to bring a couple of amazing gringos to actually help us with explaining what this initiative is about.
The P and the P.
Yeah, meet them.
Bianca and Patrick.
Bianca and Patrick.
So it's about metrics, gaps, and gains.
Yeah.
And you're going to show that this is so much more than fancy guesswork.
We'll try.
Take it away.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I'll semi-moderate this, but perhaps to start, Patrick, why don't you give us an idea of what the Food Systems Countdown Initiative is?
Sure, Mario. Hello, everyone. Linking to the last CEO session, there's a famous CEO who once is ascribed as saying, you manage what you measure, meaning that if you don't measure it, you have a hard time managing. And that's what this session is all about, the metrics. How do we measure transformation? This, the Food Systems to 2030 Countdown Initiative, emerged out of the first UN Food Systems Summit, when it became very clear to everyone that there was no unified system for measuring progress, measuring challenges in the process of transformation. It's one thing for EAT-Lancet to define and set targets. It's another thing to figure out progress. So a group of many dozens of scientists set up a very consultative, very wide-ranging, multi-phased, multi-layered process of consultation with scientists and policymakers around the world to come up with a minimum set of indicators that people agree need to be measured as at a minimum to understand transformation. That's what we're going to be hearing about today. They're clustered into 5 themes: food and natural resources, health and nutrition, governance, resilience, and poverty, essentially, with about 50 indicators spanning those kinds of themes. Now, the indicators themselves are intended to be measured globally by every country. And what we're finding, and what we're going to hear a bit more from Bianca, is that we're seeing some progress on about half of those indicators, no progress on some, and maybe regression on others. So the importance here is for policymakers and scientists to understand where are we going, at what pace, and what is the inequity in terms of transformation potential. So I think that hand right over to Bianca.
Great. Thank you. Waiting for the slide. Oh. So as Patrick mentioned, we at the Food Systems Countdown Initiative have a baseline of where countries currently are in terms of food system emissions, population nutrition, agricultural employment. But that doesn't necessarily tell us how far away they are from a target or how quickly they need to move towards a target. And we know setting targets are very important for policymakers. This helps them identify blind spots, share best practices amongst their regional counterparts, and take corrective action. We know that SDGs have targets, the Paris Agreement has targets, but for food systems, we didn't have a set of targets for our 50 indicators. And that's something we really wanted to do. I'm going to walk you through a couple of indicators today, but we have done this for the set of 50 indicators, and we're hoping to have that published sometime next year. So the first indicator is the availability of fruits and vegetables. This is a supply of fruits and vegetables at the farm gate. And when you're thinking about setting a target for something like this, you ultimately want to start at the consumption level, where we do have a target for WHO, 400 grams per capita per day. When you take into consideration the inedible portion of the commodity itself, household and retail level food waste, as well as food supply chain losses, this actually equates to about 800 grams per capita per day of fruits and vegetables combined. Right here you see is 400 grams per capita per day for just fruits. And you can see most regions are on track to meeting the target by 2030 and by 2050. The same thing goes for vegetables. And you can see that actually one region, Europe, is already surpassing the target of 400 grams per capita per day. So that tells us that we're in a good position in terms of supply, but we know supply does not equal consumption. And you've probably heard that many times over the last couple of days, that there's many barriers in terms of affordability. When you look at the population who cannot afford a healthy diet, we know this is upwards of 2.8 billion people. You can drastically see, if we set that target at 0%, how many regions are off track and will likely not meet the target by 2030 or 2050. The same thing goes for food system emissions, and I'm sure many of you know this as well. We're severely off track. Most regions have plateaued over the last 2 decades, and in order to get to net zero emissions, we need to make drastic changes. And then finally, social protection coverage. This is in our livelihoods, poverty, and equity group. What we see is this is the share of the population who is covered under one sort of social protection scheme, social insurance, or a labor market program. And what you can see, we are on track to meeting the target of 100% by 2030 and 2050. We're not showing historical data here because this data comes from World Bank and it's survey-based data. So it would not be appropriate to aggregate the data and show you historical trends. Now that's all well and good, and we have targets now, but ultimately, how do you get there? And we've talked about that just in the transformation session on the science stage. And our colleagues earlier this year published a paper on governance and resilience as entry points for change. And we really wanted to look at what are the interactions between different indicators. Ultimately, what we found was governance and resilience had the most amount of connections to other indicators, and ultimately, we realized those are points of action. So what I'm showing you here is some work from our colleagues Kate Schneider and Ro Remens, who is here somewhere. You can also see this on the food systems dashboard, and you can click through all the different types of indicators. I'm showing you just one indicator here, civil society participation. We've talked about that time and time again. How do you increase civil society participation, and what are its connections? You'll see here there are many outward arrows, meaning it's possible for civil society as an index to possibly change other indicators. When you look at resilience, this is the prevalence of severe coping strategies, and this comes from WFP. What you'll see is the opposite. It is an outcome-based indicator, and there are many other indicators that influence it, looking at the pink arrows that are moving inwards. And then finally, we know that accountability is necessary, and starting with these targets is one step, but we need governments to actually take them and use them. One thing that we're also doing with the Food Systems Countdown Initiative is adapting the framework to national levels. We know many countries are currently have food systems transformation pathways, but they do not have monitoring frameworks. And so we've started that work in 7 countries, and we'll be doing another 7 countries in 2026, to take the global framework and downscale it to indicators that are appropriate to countries, and what priorities do they have. I'll hand it over to Mario to finish this off.
Okay, well, great. Thanks a lot, Bianca. So as you can see, we have a series of indicators that we are monitoring. And this is incredibly important for any initiative dealing with change. The beauty of the FSCI is that it's been vetted and vetted by a significant number of stakeholders. And more recently, the FAO agreed to take it on board as a way of monitoring progress in food systems for the countries that have done the food systems transformation pathways. This is super useful because we then can actually peg the kinds of results that we're obtaining in the EAT-Lancet report and start trying to work on strategies at the country level just to see how they're actually going to work for the transformation of actions in particular countries. This is unique in the sense that we're going to have not only the targets but also already the monitoring framework to deal with this. And just as Patrick said, this came about from the Food Systems Summit. We are incredible at writing reports, and we are writing reports particularly with lots of recommendations, but with no actors to deal with them. So you've seen usually the final chapters of these reports, great bullet points but there's never a who has to do something. Who has to do, and what is the accountability that we're actually going to have for achieving these? So I think that we are at a time where we really need to start really looking at who's going to do what and how are we going to monitor the change that is required around the world. Patrick, would you like to say some additional things on this?
I think it's important just to reiterate the dashboard, the food systems dashboard that has all of these data, and they're dynamically interacted with. 2 annual reports are currently out there, published by the Countdown Initiative. A 3rd will be ready soon. Not just presenting the numbers, but actually digging deeply into a particular topic, like governance, for example, as an entry point for making change. I just want to reiterate, it may sound to some people 50 indicators, oh my gosh, here we go again, asking people to monitor everything. Well, I've been in rooms in the ministries responsible for food systems transformation in countries like Nepal or Mozambique, and the discussions there were, we need about, 350, 400 indicators to be able to make sure we're touching everything. My reaction is, oh my God, no. Keep it feasible, functional, and something, therefore, that you will use to actually guide or redirect and pivot your actions so that transformation can be achieved. But these 50 are ones that can be tracked globally, mostly, and allow us to look at relative progress towards the targets.
Yes, and one really important thing, it sounds like we have it all sorted out. Not at all. Not at all. Data quality is a really, really big issue. Yeah. Bianca, would you like to say something about the topic? You were mentioning in the other session how that was really important. And is there any particular data you feel also we should be getting much better at getting?
I'll draw on the experience of the 7 countries that we've already done workshops in for downscaling the global framework. What we've seen is countries are offering different indicators, different data sources that ultimately at the global level we just don't have the capacity for. I can give you some examples. Food loss and waste, food safety was very important in Ethiopia. In Kenya, school meal programming, fortification. In Nigeria, number of farmers that are adopting climate sustainable practices. We just don't have that data at a global level, and therefore it is important to look subnationally and see where these data do exist. There are, of course, other countries that have data gaps, and we've put in some recommendations to see how could we fill those gaps. And it's an iterative process. Once we finish some of these country adaptation workshops, we're planning to revise the global framework as well to try and adopt some of these other indicators.
Yes, and just think about it. You mentioned number of farmers. Believe it or not, we don't really know how many farmers are in the world. We are relatively good at understanding how much land we're using, but we don't know actually who's managing and what are the kinds of numbers and what is actually likely to happen in the future with that kind of farmers. Perhaps there is here a call for novel techniques for trying to get hold of this data. Maybe AI will have a really important role in the future. And I can imagine that there's a lot of business leaders in this room. It's incredibly hard for us to have access to data that the business community, that the private sector has. And there's some incredibly important data that could actually help get more robust statistics about the current state of the systems and how they're likely to move forward in the future. So this is perhaps a call from the FSCI to actually, well, open up, please help us. We'll treat it in an anonymous way, but we really, really need to have access to better information from your sectors. With that,
Mario,
Patrick,
and you mentioned the future. We're often thinking about 2030. We're often modeling targets to 2030. That's the year that the Sustainable Development Goal agenda ends, right? And as most of you know, within the existing Sustainable Development Goal indicator suite, there's really nothing on diets. There's nothing on food systems per se. So what we are doing now, hopefully, will contribute to dialogue around what should there be post-2030 going forward in any new unified global agenda, setting targets, setting indicators up to maybe 2050. We need to have good evidence of what can work, what we can track, what makes a difference to policymakers before those new indicators get set.
Yeah, absolutely. Bianca, final words?
No, just a call for countries that are interested. I think we're very happy to engage with you and look at your data, look at the data quality, data sources. We do also have country dashboards where countries have put forth a data framework that they wanted to be visualized on the food systems dashboard. And you can go through all those different dashboards. We have those for Kenya, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and we're working on several others, Mexico, Brazil, Rwanda in the future. And these country dashboards allow you to click through and even go down to the district level to see what diets, nutrition, and health looks like, what poverty, rural employment looks like. And I think that's a great advancement, and we need more countries on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can see, the countries that Bianca mentioned were mostly low and middle income countries, but that's not to say that there's significant data gaps in OECD countries. So, if there are OECD countries that would like to have an assessment of the data and the indicators and work with us in the implementation, please come forward, because this is more of a generalized problem in terms of data quality and availability, and it would be really useful to test how the Food Systems Countdown Initiative could help. We have a website, we have reports, we have the series of indicators, and the data cubes are also available on request for whenever wants to access them. But the key thing is that this initiative is really, really picking up as the potential monitoring framework for food systems globally. And we would love if you could all contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, Bianca, Mario.